Before I go into more of these create surface tools, I want to talk about other ways to generate curves. We looked at the CV curve tool, but we also have a couple others that are worth mentioning. Let me go back to my top view here. And one of them is the EP curve tool. EP means edit points. And so I can go ahead and use the EP curve tool to generate a curve by dropping in the edit points. Now we still, this type of curve, if I right click here, it still is generating control vertex points from my edit points. So the kind of difference between the two, EP curve tool or CV curve tool, is whether you want to really specifically position the control vertex points and then generate edit points based off of a kind of automatic generation of your edit points, or if you want to specify where the edit points are and then generate control vertex points based off of the kind of math and geometry. So this is the EP, and so once we're in the control vertex mode, you can see we still have the start of our curve. Starts here and ends there. And let me go back to perspective view. So this is my kind of EP curve tool that I just created. Go back to object mode here and delete this. Another kind of curve tool we have is just the pencil tool, and this allows you to freehand your curve. If you have like a Wacom tablet, you might like using this. And again, when I go in, it's just a regular curve. I can go in and I can edit the control vertex points. Or I can go in and I can edit the edit points here as well, okay, to really fine tune the shape of my curve. Lastly, I have the Bezier curve tool, so you can find it here on the shelf. There's other curve tools, but these are the three I want to talk about now, or four really. We talked about the pencil curve tool. The Bezier curve tool is really similar to, it's actually the same type of tool that you would find in Illustrator using the pen tool or in Photoshop. And you generate curves with this tool by, go to my top view here, by dropping in handles, two tangents, and an anchor point. And so you can, and so this might look familiar. We are dropping in an anchor point, and then by dragging, I'm able to manipulate the shape of this curve by manipulating these tangents or these handles. What's nice about the Bezier curve tool is that I'm able, if I don't drag and drop, if I just click, I'm able to create a corner. And so this might be useful if you want to create some curves that aren't as fluid and have kind of sharp corners. Okay, and again, I would just hit enter to finish my curve. Now if I go in, I still have my control vertex and my, but I don't see any edit points here. So I still have my control vertices actually, but look, they're actually the handles. So I would go in and I would be manipulating these tangents in order to manipulate this curve. And you can see here that the Bezier curve is a different type of curve than the CV curve tool. We still have, it's still showing us what our direction is, and I must have put in here, this is, I must have, oh, this must be the handle. So for the Bezier curve, it's still showing me the direction of my curve based off of this tangent here. So it's saying that we're starting here and then generating this curve kind of along this line. If I shift over here, shift and right click, I'm able to change what kind of anchor point this is. So I can, I believe I can go in and I should be able to go in and change this to a corner. if I have it selected, or change it to a Bezier corner, which gives me the handle to manipulate. And so this, the Bezier curve tool really gives you the option of creating some sharp corners alongside your normal curve kind of forms. So to get back to these other surface create tools, another one we have is called planar. And this is very simple, that if I draw a type of curve here, and this actually brings me to another point, which is if you're familiar with using Illustrator and using the pen tool, if in that application, if I kind of click on the first point of my curve once I'm around the corner to the last, it'll close my curve. It doesn't work that way in Maya. You actually have to go up to curves and say open close. And first I have to hit enter. And then, so now I have my curve object, and if I go up to curves and I hit open close, it's going to close that curve. Now, if I don't like the way that looks, I can just go in and kind of edit the shape of my curve here. But that is how you make a kind of closed curve. And so that's kind of necessary if I'm going to use this next function, which is called planar. And what planar does is it just creates a kind of flat plane out of my curve. So I have my curve selected as an object. I go up to surfaces and say planar. And so now it fills in my curve with as a surface. Now, I talked a little bit about NURBS patches being rectangular patches. And so if I go to the hull of this object, we can see that this planar object is this rectangular patch that is only rendering within the inside bounds of my curve. Okay, so we can see here that it is a kind of rectangular NURBS patch. Talk a little bit more about NURBS patches. I'm going to go ahead and create this cubic, this NURBS cube. I don't see why you would ever create a NURBS cube, but for some reason if you did, because you're creating a rectangular form, a form that has like straight lines completely out of curves. And so in order to do that, this object actually isn't a solid object. It's a group of separate NURBS patches that have been stitched together as a group. We can kind of see this by that this is just a number of patches that have been stitched together. If I create a NURBS sphere, it's a little bit unclear on how this is a rectangular patch. It's kind of a rectangular patch that has two sides gathered into one point. Okay, let me go to my NURBS sphere here and start and end this sweep. So that's how you can kind of think that like the top and the bottom of this patch have been gathered together into a single point. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how you can think about that sphere. So anyway, planar. Now, if I have this curve, and if my curve is not is open and not closed, then it breaks that planar surface. So if I go back and open close here, we can see that this, and also another thing is this curve, to make a planar surface, it has to be a flat curve. If I go into my curve and say manipulate my control vertex points on my curve here, it's going to break that patch. But if I go to my trim surface and I go into control vertex here, I have, and we saw with the hull what this NURBS patch looks like in that it's being rendered on the inside, but I have these control vertex points here. So if I go to surface point, no, that's not what I wanted to do, excuse me. if I go and, oh, I'm in the wrong tool, go to control vertex, I am able to change the shape of this patch. Oh, there we go. It's kind of hard to see, right? So I can start to change the kind of curvature of the NURBS patch by pulling at its own kind of control vertex points. Okay, so that's another way that you can start to make surfaces from curves. Another one I want to go over is revolve. And so for this, I'm going to go to my, I have perspective view and like everything here. Let me go to my side view and let me just change this to top again. Okay. If I go to my side view, and for this, for revolve, I'm going to want to snap to grid. So let me snap to grid and just drop in some edit points to create a kind of bowl shape. And I just want to make sure that I'm actually, that I'm starting and ending my curve right here on this central origin axis, this y-axis. So I have my curve, and now I'm going to hit enter, and the curve's been completed. And now if I go to surfaces and I say revolve, it's going to revolve that curve and kind of create a whole object out of it. Again, it is a NURBS patch, so I can change where the starting and the end sweep of this patch is. Okay, so here's kind of what revolve will do in order to create a kind of curved bowl or vase or anything that has a kind of symmetrical kind of quality. You could use revolve. But even after the fact, I can go in and this is true of any kind of surface that's generated from curves. When you have history turned on, you're able to go into the curve itself, because it's still tied to that surface, is tied to the curve, go into control vertex and manipulate. Ooh, I'm still on, sorry, snap to grid here, let me turn that off, and manipulate the way that this object looks based off of the shape of that curve. Okay. So some other options here for creating surfaces would be the extrude tool. So for extrude, we need two perpendicular curves. Let me go ahead to my top view, and I'm going to create a CV curve and just drop in a curve here. Okay, and now I'm going to go into my side view and create a circle. Create a circle. Is it doing it flat? Okay. I don't have interactive create on here, so let me go ahead and rotate this in the Z direction. Let's see. No, I want it in the X direction. And let me go ahead and put this at the start of my curve here, and let me rotate it. Let me frame this up. Let me make sure this is the start of my curve, and it is. I have my little square box. Let me go ahead and rotate this around here just so it's perpendicular to my curve. And I want to place it, and so I'm still, I believe, in a world space. Let me go to my tool settings and change this to object, and I want to move this back a little bit. Okay, so that's pretty close. So what extrude does is it allows me to, and my screen's getting a little bit tight here. Let me go ahead and open it up. It allows me to use this curve to create a shape that will basically, the circle will extrude along this curve. So if I select, I believe, my circle first and then my curve second, and go to curve surfaces and say extrude, now you see that that circle has been extruded along this curve. Now it's not perfect. There's a number of parameters here under our attribute editor. So I can say, like, I can change this to be a certain distance along the curve, which I can change here. I can, and let's see, I can make this a tube or make it flat. And flat, you see, like, kind of, it's hard to kind of tell, but here it will take this circle and it won't necessarily like follow the curve. It will follow the curve, but not in two directions, just in that one direction. Let me go back to tube here. And I think if I hit fixed path, this is the box I wanted to hit here. Fixed path means that it will follow pretty closely the curve. The reason it's not following the curve is because it's not 100% perpendicular to the start of my curve. But if I hit fixed path, now it will kind of follow really closely my curve. And again, I can change, going into my circle here, I can change the size of this curve and it will change the entire size of the surface. I can change the control vertex points of my curve. And this is doing it for my surface, but let me go in. So this is something to bring up. I'm able to manipulate the control vertex points, or I can manipulate different parts of my surface, but I can also manipulate the entire surface by manipulating my curves. And so what I can do actually is I can even move this, let's say, move this surface out of the way and just be able to see my curve and still go in and kind of edit the curve, and it will edit my surface because it's tied to it. So I can still go in and really hone in on what kind of shape I want, okay? Another tool is the BiRail tool. And oops, I have to plug into a battery source. So let me go ahead and do that, and when I come back, I'll talk about the BiRail tool.